Today we're going to talk about the history of non-alcoholic beer. How did it go from people not really liking it to people being pretty okay with it?
I like it.
How did it go from tasting pretty to tasting pretty okay? At least that's what some people think. That's what a lot of people think, because I don't know if you've noticed or not, but non-alcoholic beer, it's everywhere. From Tom Holland ads to full-blown athletic documentaries funded by brands like Athletic Brewing Company. Back when I was growing up, my grandfather drank O'Doul's because he had to quit drinking the booze, and it was the only option. He had no other choices. So how did we go from that to what we have now? It can all be traced back to an accident and a white lie told in the 1970s. Non-alcoholic beer has been around for quite a long time, but it's always struggled to find a target consumer until recent times. In this video, I'm going to go over the history of NA beverages and try to answer the question, why did NA beer go from being pretty terrible to being pretty good? I know that taste is subjective, so you might not think that NA beer tastes good. You might not even see the point. But what you cannot deny is the NA market has exploded.
Yeah, several research firms found sales were up more than 30% last year.
We are at Go Brewing in Naperville, a new non-alcoholic brewery.
As you just saw in that news clip, there are entire microbreweries dedicated to making NA craft beer. When I first started doing research for this topic, I discovered that in Belgium there was a beer released in 1918, non-alcoholic of course, and it was marketed to athletes in the same way the Athletic Brewing Company is targeting athletes now. But what's changed in the last 100 years? So we're gonna dive into that in this whole video. However fun it may be to imagine a bunch of hipsters riding their fixed gear bikes, twirling their mustaches at an AA meeting in the basement of a record store, concocting the first craft IPA, that's just unfortunately not where our story begins. Our story begins in medieval times.
Might I fetch you something from the barkeep?
Dost have thou a mug of ale for me and me mate?
Beer for the longest time was seen as a poor man's beverage and was distributed to the working class, often as a form of payment. The term beer was broadly applied to many different styles of hydration at the time. Medieval brewing is an interesting rabbit hole, but for the point I'm trying to make here, we only need to know that the history of low alcohol beer goes pretty far back, and it was made by essentially boiling out the alcohol. This produced a beverage that probably tasted pretty terrible. But for hundreds of years, this was the same method used for non-alcoholic brews until the 1970s, but don't worry, we'll get there soon. In addition to boiling out alcohol, another alcohol reduction method used was to simply add water. From what I've read, it appears to be pretty uncommon for any of these early practices to remove all of the alcohol completely. These early versions of alcohol-free beer usually still had 2 to 3% ABV, or alcohol by volume, and it was often referred to as small beer.
He's just a little guy. How cute, he's just a little guy, little small beer. I'm just drinking my little cute small beer after working all day in the fields. I am so hot, I am famished. I just need a tasty little beverage.
That was weird. Now let's jump forward in history to 1918. This is when that Belgian company I was talking to you about earlier produced a NA beer that was marketed to athletes who wanted to remain sharp for competition. Malto, which I could not find a picture of, probably because it disappeared very quickly and it was released 100 years ago, but it was one of the modern world's first alcohol-free beers, but it was a flop. Around this time in America, with growing concerns about the temperance movement, alcohol companies were starting to think, we need to come up with a plan. And that's why Anheuser-Busch in 1908 directed their chief chemist to start developing a non-alcoholic beverage that tasted very similar to beer. Like I said, the company was tuned into the social unrest around alcohol that would later inspire the prohibition of alcohol under the 18th Amendment. While the 18th Amendment was not ratified until January 6, 1919, Anheuser had already released its beer-like non-alcoholic beverage named Bevo in 1916. Bevo was given to soldiers during the First World War because there was essentially a ban on alcohol. Bevo was a malted beverage that contained 0.5% ABV and was made using cereal, but Bevo probably didn't taste anything like a lot of the craft NA brews of today because, again, it was made using this ancient medieval practice of boiling out the alcohol in a process called dealcoholization. One interesting thing to note about Bevo was that the language that the marketers used wasn't about beer replacement. You can see here in this advertisement from Roanoke News in 1920, the advertisers were leaning more into the fear of sanitary water. Then in this advertisement from 1919, you can see where where some concerns were raised over how unhealthy real alcohol was. But Americans did not care about health at all, apparently in the 1920s, because during Prohibition, Anheuser-Busch thought that their near beer would be a massive hit. They even built an entirely new bottling facility for Bevo, but the product flopped. I read a quote from someone that works at Anheuser-Busch on historychannel.com or history.com, whatever it is, for the History Channel, and it said that the people at Anheuser severely underestimated people's willingness during this time to break the law. Pretty crazy. So with all of that being said, the demand was not anywhere near what people expected because people just were not ready to stop drinking, even if it meant that they were breaking the law. The alcohol scene just moved underground, and bootleggers profited off of distribution instead of big corporation. And as you probably already know, the 18th Amendment was later repealed by the ratification of the 21st Amendment on December 5th, 1933. Then after the 21st Amendment, it would be another few decades before America was anywhere close to starting to have any sort of a honest conversation with itself about its alcohol consumption.
Light beer, Joey.
Which one? Make it the right light.
However, before America was ready to start ditching booze completely, they desperately tried to find a way to drink healthier. This led to the rise of light beer. Miller Lite is often touted as the original light beer, but this is simply not true, because in 1941, Coors manufactured a beer with a lower alcohol content for soldiers called Coors Light. That was because during the Second World War, the US government decided instead of banning booze completely like it had in the First World War, they would instead give soldiers alcohol that just was less intoxicating to keep morales high and to keep people from getting blackout and getting, I don't know, impaled by Nazis with bayonets. However great an idea this was, Coors Light was discontinued after only a year. But Miller Lite wasn't even the first light beer during the light beer renaissance, because before it was released, there was another light beer released to the market called Gablinger's Diet Beer. Gablinger was the invention of a biochemist named Dr. Joseph L. Owads. The diet beer did not last long as a product, and after its flop, Dr. Owads gave the recipe to a friend at a Chicago-based brewery called Meisterbrau. Meisterbrau tried to market the beer towards health-based consumers, but American culture still wasn't ready. They were not ready at all to give up their desperate booze. My sweet booze. A man works all day, and a man gets to drink a beer after a long day of work. And there's no other way. I'm trying to make all of us Americans gays, trans gays, drinking Bud Light still, I guess.
Fuck Bud Light.
Kid Rock was seen drinking it after shooting up a bunch of cans earlier this year.
So again, Americans were not ready to compromise on the whole booze thing, so the product was scrapped again. Meisterbrau eventually went bankrupt and sold their business to Miller, and after the acquisition, Miller revived the diet beer recipe, but they hired an advertising agency that addressed the country's biggest concerns about light beer: the taste.
The big guys who think the best thing about light is it tastes great. Yeah, it tastes great.
So Americans at this time, they're like, fitness is a thing. We should maybe take care of ourselves. We should stop eating a bunch of beef all the time. Maybe we should do some Pilates, do some exercising. So Americans wanted to get fit. That was like the cultural narrative at the time, right? But they were not ready to stop getting drunk yet. The advertising agency was brilliant and they knew this, so the product was a perfect fit. The success of Miller Lite prompted Coors to get back in the light beer game by reviving Coors Light.
Coors Light, the surprise is how good it tastes.
While these two companies were having a marketing battle in America, a German brewery named Binding Brauer was trying to make a superior light beer by using this experimental brewing technique called arrested or controlled fermentation. Without going too deeply into the science, because I'm not smart enough to read it and to let the information process and then say it to you simply, and also because that's not what this video is about, but hey. So without going too deep into the science, this is a process where you maintain a low temperature during the brewing process. While using this method, brewers realized that the ABV never got above 0.5%. This accidental discovery was about to forever change the non-alcoholic beer landscape with the introduction of Klosthaler. There was just one problem. The world was not ready for another near beer. Not yet anyway. So what do you do? If you're the marketing team at Klosthaler, what you do is you lie by omission. Klosthaler was originally marketed as what's called a Pritzen beer, which translates to prince beer or little beer. This white lie allowed Klosthaler to be picked up by bar owners and retailers until later they realized that the light beer actually had little to no alcohol content. I wish I could go back and see how people reacted to this, but I would imagine people are mostly fine with it because Klosthaler is still like being sold, and it's actually now an international success as far as a non-alcoholic beer goes. But on the other side of the pond, America would not be ready for the return of NA beers for quite some time, actually a few decades. We had to slowly be warmed up to the idea of clean living. And while we weren't ready to ditch the booze completely, we were getting tuned into the idea of fitness very slowly. The American public, after all, they still wanted to get sloppy on the weekends and have a good goddamn time, because that is how you be free. You go to work for someone else, and you are told what to do all day. You are told when you can leave. You are told when you can take a vacation. You're told how much time, and if you don't listen, you'll get fired, and then you gotta get blackout drunk on the weekend. So yeah, Americans wanted to do all this, but they wanted to look pretty good while they're doing it too. So during the 80s, Anheuser-Busch released a beer called LA Beer. If you're a craft beer fan, you've already heard the term session beer, but if you don't know, a session beer is a beer that is basically meant to be consumed in massive quantities over a long period of time, usually during an activity where you don't want to black out, like when you're mowing the lawn or camping with your family. This is what Anheuser-Busch was trying to do with LA Beer in the 80s. So that brings us into the 1990s, where in America we saw an uptick in a national interest towards sobriety, mental health, and well-being. There was a bunch of grassroots communities at this time, like the well-breedy movement, and then we had the straight-edge punk scene. These scenes were emerging and these communities were popping up to help encourage and support people who wanted to live a clean and healthy lifestyle. This cultural shift inspired Miller to make their first near beer called Sharps, and Anheuser-Busch released O'Doul's. Like I said at the beginning of the video, O'Doul's was the only option for a long time. It was popular and it was a staple amongst many bars. Like I said, the only option for almost 30 years. O'Doul's is made by using the tried and true medieval method of first brewing a beer and then boiling out all of the booze. Sharps, on the other hand, was made by using controlled fermentation. And fun side note, during the research, a lot of the sources I read said that Miller used a process that they said was patented by them called Evercool, but it sounds identical to the process that's used by many NA craft brewers now that was first used by Klosthaler. So throughout the 90s, the most widely available options for non-drinkers who still wanted to drink something that resembled a beer came from only Miller and Anheuser, which completely makes sense because the demand for variety in regular beer wasn't there yet either. This was the era, after all, of the big three: Coors, Miller, and Budweiser from Anheuser-Busch. Budweiser. That's baked into my brain. And you know what's messed up about that? That was baked into my brain when I was like 8 years old watching the Super Bowl. 100% those frogs were marketing to little kids, because I know I have bought Budweiser several times back when I was boozing, because I looked at it and I thought those frogs would want you to get Budweiser. Sir, I wouldn't even see the other brands. I'd be like, that's the cartoon that I like growing up, and that's what an American drinks. But the big three were getting scared because everything was starting to slowly change in America, because IPAs were starting to gain some popularity amongst the cool kids, leading up to the mainstream adoption of microbreweries and the craft beer boom of the 2010s. And shortly after the beginning of the microbrew craft beer boom, the first Dry January was officially announced in 2013 by Alcohol Change UK, but no matter how much the company would like to claim stake to the name, they weren't the first people to use the term. There are several sources that trace the first use of the word back to 2008, and the Seattle Times wrote an article about this budding movement in 2010. Something that I've been finding super interesting about doing these sociological deep dives into culture and marketing is how, when you take a closer look at something like the non-alcoholic craft beer boom or the general interest in sobriety, it's never just like one thing that shifts public opinion. It's like there's a collective interest that starts with a very small change, and then people all over the place start tapping into the collective curiosity of what you might call the cultural zeitgeist, and they start experimenting, which is exactly what happened in 2015, post craft beer boom, post Dry January getting some traction. That's when this guy named Philip Brands started Bravus Brewing Company, North America's first non-alcoholic craft brewing company.
You know, our method, which just doesn't really put a lot of alcohol in the first place, just is more it's just closer to a true craft beer, brewing process. And
honestly, Bravus is one of my favorite NA options out there, and I'm not sure why they aren't more popular, but one thing is certain: they were super early to the market. But maybe too early, because in 2018, a book titled Sober Curious, authored by Ruby Warrington, came out, and it hit the market at the perfect time. American booze hounds and yoga moms everywhere were primed and ready to question their relationship with the bottle. This made the book a massive success, and it has since inspired a whole world of sober curious, sober-ish, and just normal people who are ready to quit. A great cultural shift allowed being sober to go from being a stigma to a strength. People no longer thought, and I still think this is true, people no longer think if you say no to a drink at a party that you must have been some knockdown, drag-out drunk who got blacked out at a Kohl's and left her kids in the car during summer. People just are like, oh, cool. That's awesome. Yeah, good for you, exploring yourself, trying to take care of yourself. This book's release also happened to coincide with the release of Athletic Brewing Company, which is arguably the most well-known in a craft beverage brewery, at least in North America. Athletic was founded 1 year before the release of the book in 2017, and it has quickly dominated the market. That's it for this video, and if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for being here, and just, hit subscribe. It's free. Obviously, you like the video. It helps out. Thank you so much. But if you're not new, you know that I quit drinking 3 years ago. So this video is my way of continuing the tradition of making a sobriety video at the beginning of every year, and for the indefinite future, I'm going to be focusing on historical style videos. But if you're struggling to quit drinking, please reach out to a friend, family member, a medical professional, go to a meeting, or you can reach out to me, DM me on Instagram, comment if you want to share publicly your struggles or to give people words of encouragement, or you can go to my Patreon and you can hit subscribe for free and then DM me there. Anyway, there's a bunch of ways to get a hold of me. I'm open to talk if you need to talk to somebody, but I would highly encourage you, go talk to someone in real life, okay? If you need me, I'm here. I'm happy for it. But go out, meet people, do things. You got this. You're so much stronger than you realize. But anyway, I'm just so excited and ready to learn about the world and to make videos in this style instead of talking about being sober every video. So thank you for bearing with me. I love you all, and I'll see you again soon. Peace.